doing a video on this little bugger. So this is a cube within a cube of wood. Doesn't come out. There's actually no way to get it out. And the way this works, it's a secret. It's all the same piece of wood. So you start out with a solid block like this, and you drill down into the hole like this, and you drill down in the center of each face, and you drill on each side until you have a solid block, and then you can break the corners out, and then you have this block that kind of moves around inside. And you know, it's a cool centerpiece. It's just a lot of fun to make, and people will come by and they'll see it sitting on your table or something, and they'll pick it up and they'll play with it around a little bit, and they'll say like, "Oh, how did you get that block in there?" And, you know, you can tell them or keep it your secret. Anyway, I'm going to be showing you how I made one of these. I actually saw a video online about how to make this. I thought to myself, well, might as well give it a shot. So I actually made one that has 3 layers. So there's the top, which is the main cube, that never changes, and then you have the inside one, and then you have one more inside of that. So it's a cube within a cube within a cube. And today I'm going to be showing you exactly how I did that using a drill press and some hole saws. Roll that clip.
Now, in order to find the exact center of the block, you're going to want to draw 2 diagonal lines stretching from corner to corner across one face of the block. Using a straight edge and a pen, it's very easy to draw these lines in order to get the exact center of any face. If your block is curved on the ends, it might be a little difficult, but try to make it as exact as possible. The point where these 2 lines intersect can be seen to be the exact center of the face, right here. Now with your block fully marked, you can go on to setting up the drill. Using a vise, tighten it here to make sure that the block stays in place while drilling. The only problem being that here, the vise is still able to move, and in the case of a strong and powerful drill, it might move the vise around. So, using a clamp, we can more firmly affix the vise to the stand itself. As you can still see, the vise is still a little loose, so I tightened it a bit more on the clamp here to make sure that it didn't move around. There it is, nice and tight. Now I can raise the stand in order to get it closer to the drill bit and make it easier to drill. Here you can see the hole saw. It's got a point in the middle with a jagged edge around the outside. Using the chuck key to loosen the chuck itself in order to slip the bit in, we can set up the drill. Now the first thing I did here was try to line up the nub in the center of the bit with the exact center that I had measured out on the cube face. This of course required me to loosen the constraints a little bit in order to move it around, but once I did that I was able to match up the pivot point of the drill bit with the exact center. Retighten the constraints, and we're ready to go. Switching the drill on, came down very lightly into the wood, just enough to make a little divot to show the exact size of the hole. You may be able to see that the wood is actually moving a tiny bit, and that might happen depending on how tight the clamps can get and how tight you can hand turn them. If there's a slight movement, it's not so much of a big deal, as long as you have the hole already impressed into the wood. Now with the hole properly drilled, we can loose up the restraints and pull the cube off of the press. Back to the drawing board, we need to mark the depth of the holes. To do this, take a straight edge and put it right along the 2 points where each diagonal line meets the edge of the circle. Then draw 2 straight lines coming out from the edge of the circle, perpendicular to the sides of the cube. As you see here, they form straight lines that cross perpendicular to each edge. We can use these lines to measure exactly how far the drill press needs to go down in order to drill the holes correctly. As you can see, the drill press comes down exactly to the line drawn on the cube. The gauge up here is a slight gauge that we can use, and when we lower it, it stops the drill press from going any further. And you can adjust that gauge by turning the rings around the pole in the center of it. Now here you see I did put the cube back on the drill press in order to make sure I had the center correct. It's important that when you're doing this, you don't actually move the vise around. I actually made a mistake in this process because I pulled the clamp in the vise off when I unclipped the cube, unlimbered it from the press, and I shouldn't have done that because it causes you to lose your center. And one of the most important things here is to keep the center so you don't have to remeasure the position of the cube every time you drill a new hole. So I refastened the clamp and the vise to the stand. Coming back to the drawing board again, you need to make 2 more diagonal lines reaching into the center of the larger hole you made in order to drill the smaller hole. This is important because we'll also need to decide the depth of the smaller holes, as you'll see later. Now replacing the larger drill bit with the smaller one, tightening with the chuck key. If done right, it should still be centered on the machine. Now, as we know, I didn't do it right, so as you see here, I need to recenter it before turning it on. But now that I have it centered, I drill down in order to make enough of a mark to decide how big, or to see how big the smaller hole will be. There it is. So coming back, you see now we have the smaller hole, and we need to do the same thing we did again to decide the depth with the smaller hole. From the point where the diagonal lines meet the smaller hole's edge, draw a perpendicular line perpendicular to the sides of the cube, going out from the center, just like that. Going back to the drill press, we can use this to decide the depth, what the correct depth is to drill into it. Now, it is important to be cautious when drilling this so you don't break out the center of the cube too early. So what I would suggest is making the gauge slightly shallower than the line, and then when you get to the point where all 6 holes are drilled, then you can just go around once more and add a little more depth to each hole. One thing that might make this easier is if you put a small dot in the corner of each face. That way, you'll always know exactly where the center of your cube is, because sometimes things can move around a little bit, or they're not exactly as perfectly centered as you might have thought. And when that happens, it can get difficult to refine your center if you want to drill each face the same. And so by putting a little dot on the top corner of each face, you'll know exactly the position the cube is in every time you turn it to a new face. As you see here, now that I have gauged the correct depth for the smaller bits, for the smaller hole, I'm now drilling down as far as it'll let me, creating that deep hole you see there. And I repeat this on each face. What you're seeing here is that, as I mentioned before, the suggestion about putting the dot in the upper corner of one of the cube's faces, I didn't do that for this. So now I have to move it around sometimes in order to make sure I found the exact center. And in fact, you'll see if you look closely that I actually drew an X onto each one of the faces in order to make sure I got the center correctly, but that won't always be necessary. So now, having drilled down into each face, you'll see that there's a hole for each side, but they haven't quite connected yet, which means I'm going to have to go a little deeper on each hole. All that requires is loosening the depth gauge on the drill press slightly, maybe a 1/4 of an inch, maybe even an 1/8 of an inch if you want to be extra careful and you have a little extra time. And just going down each hole again and cutting a slightly more out of the whole depth of every hole. If you do end up having time to make multiple attempts at this, you will notice that it gets easier and easier the more you do it. You get a feel for how deep the hole needs to be and how further to go when you readjust the gauge. And as you look inside, you might be able to see that the smaller cube inside the block is just starting to take shape. It's still hard to see because of how dark it is inside there, but it is just starting to become visible. Now, removing the cube and replacing the drill bit, we can start drilling the larger holes. As you can see, I actually tried to grab the bit. It's a bit hot after you do that. Depending on how rough and how durable the wood you're using is, it can actually get quite warm. And if you'll notice, if you look back at some of the early parts of the video, you'll see kind of smoke actually coming up out of the cube as I'm drilling it, because that's how hot the bit is getting. It's actually burning some of the wood. Not enough to be dangerous, of course, but just enough to, give it one of those sheens, that burnt sheen that wood can get when you whittle it. So now I need to readjust the gauge, and you'll see I'm placing the bit down to exactly where it needs to go. And what you can't see is my other hand is reaching up to the depth gauge and is adjusting it now to be exact. So now this is the point where those markings in the upper corner of each face comes in handy. Now that you've drilled the smaller hole, the X becomes very difficult. The center of the X becomes very difficult to see. Now that the smaller holes are there, the centering is kind of lost, so it helps a lot to have markings that kind of help you auto-center each side. As you'll see though, I continue to drill using the larger bit. I need to make a few adjustments to make sure it's on center, fitting in the holes that were made previously, and retightening to make sure everything stays where it's supposed to be. Once it's nice and tight, we can continue drilling again. I remember the problem I had when I was doing this is it happened that the wood I was using was actually very tough, and that's why you'll see the vise slip a little bit, because the wood was so strong that it was almost catching the bit, and the force of the bit spinning, while not enough to actually stop the bit against the wood, it was causing the cube to move a little bit, and thus the vise. Now you'll see I have cut out each of the larger holes, and it's almost done. What I've done here is when I looked at the cube, I decided I wasn't quite satisfied with the depth of the smaller holes. You do have to be careful when tightening this into the vise, because at this point the wood is starting to get weak with so many holes in it. So you want to be sure that you don't crack or break the wood when you tighten the vise in. Strong enough to hold it, but not too strong that it breaks. Now I'm doing a little more work here just to polish up the holes, try to get them a little deeper to that nice depth where there's just a little bit of breakthrough on each of the sides. Nothing special right around here, but I think this is a good time to mention, now despite the time lapse and the length of this video, I did try to speed it up because I know students are busy and they have a lot on their hands and they don't want to spend all day watching a video, but I think this whole project took me maybe 2 hours to do completely from start to finish. And this was the first time I had done it, so it was a new project for me at the time as well. And so I think 2 hours is a pretty good reasonable time for someone trying this project, just in leisure time if you want to, just to see if you get it to work or if you want to create it for your own personal amusement. 2 hours seems like a decent amount of chunk of time for that.
Now, as you can see from the video, I've replaced the smaller bit with the larger bit. And I'm just doing the same thing again from before, where I just take the larger bit and lower the gauge, drill each hole again, lower the gauge a little bit more, drill each hole again, and just try to get that perfect depth where it just starts to break through into each hole, but not enough to actually snap the cube out of place. And there you have it. Perfect double-layered cube within a cube. Now that you've got your wood all cut out, the only thing left to do is to separate the corners here and here with a sharp object like an X-Acto knife or a trowel. And of course, the most important part of the project is to make sure that your area is clean after you're done. Clean up all wood shavings around your machine and any mechanical parts laying around such as drill bits or chuck keys.
So as you can see, it's actually a bit of doing to get it all to work out, and you have to be careful because if you push down too far, you can actually break it out too early, and then it can be unstable and can be difficult to drill the other sides of it. If you drill one side too far, then it'll detach early and it'll kind of move, it'll vibrate around inside before you can finish making the inner cube, and then you have some problems. I actually intended to make this video a few days ago, and I've been kind of putting it off, and finally I decided to sit down and actually make it and show everyone what I've been doing. But in the meantime, I've actually had time to make a few prototypes, test a few things out. And one of the problems I had is if I go down too far on the little one, to be very, very, very careful, be very, very gentle with the small one in the very center, because as you can see, I don't know how well you can see, but there's a little hole, little divot, because the way the bit works is it's got serrated teeth around the outside of it, and it kind of shaves off wood from the center of the outwards. And in the center, it has a little pivot point, has a little nub that sticks into the wood that it pivots around. What happens is if it gets too close together, it'll actually shatter the little cube inside. It'll break through, and you're pushing down with the drill press, it'll just break the cube. So you have to be very careful with that one. This one turned out pretty well. Actually, I think this is probably my second or third go, to be honest with you. The first one worked out pretty well, but it had some flaws. I can show you. This is the very first one I made that you saw me making in the video, and as you can see, I didn't actually break it out yet. This is what it looks like right when it's done, and you can see the little cube inside, the bigger cube and everything. But if you look closely, you can actually see there's cracks. There's cracks here along the inside of this cube. What would happen if I tried to break this out is those cracks might actually cause the larger cube to just break into pieces, and then that'll really ruin it. So I haven't done any work with this one. I just left this the way it is, but I do have the successful one, which I'm pretty proud of. I don't know if you have access to a drill press at home, or if you're a student and you have a machine shop. It's a really great exercise. It's really helpful for learning the machine shop, and I think the machine shop here at my school is actually going to use this as a homework assignment to help teach kids how to use the drill press. So here I have another little project I did, which is actually serves as a stand for this cube, and it's got 3 prongs. Kind of just hold it, and they're drilled down. The way I did this, I used a long rod, cut it into 3 sections, and then I threaded the ends of the rod. I should pull one out and show you. Here you can see I threaded this rod, and I just put threads about 1 inch down, and then I took a nut, put it on, push it all the way to the top of the threads there, and then I just screw this down into the plate. The plate I actually drilled three different holes into, and then tapped the holes, which is kind of reverse threading. It's threading for holes. And now I can screw this into the holes, and when I get to the right depth, I can turn the nuts. I can turn that to tighten the rod into place so it doesn't move around too much. And I'm only hand turning this, so it's not going to be solid, but if you have a wrench or a pair of pliers, it'll work a lot better. So anyway, that's just the stand that I made. So I can take this, flop on the stand, and I got a little cool display case for it. Anyway, that's all for now. Hopefully I'll get a new camera and I'll be able to make some more videos soon. But if not, I'll see you next time. Ciao!